true state of meditation, it's a state of non-control, an egoless state. This is where people get the idea that, and they think that ego equals thought. So if I stop thinking, then I've stopped the ego. But still, to some extent, they may be trying to control, or there's some underlying intention or trying to make something. Whereas when the mind stops thinking through relaxation, through acceptance, through surrender, there is simply a flow. And that flow is not the ego, and it's not, there's no self there that could say, oh, this flow is myself. It's just flow. You are flow. Everything is flow. It becomes so clear that that is what's happening. But then, of course, the ego cuts in and says, oh, look what I just experienced. I experienced the flow. Let me tell everybody how the flow is. You know, let me write a book about the flow and, you know, make $1 million on teaching about the flow. Yeah, okay, but you kind of missed the point that it's not about self-promotion or making $1 million or something. It's nice that you want to share and, you know, allow that information to be available to everyone. But there's something sacred about it. There's something pure about it. That, yeah, you see, I stopped the words because you can't explain these things. The concepts don't match what is trying to be explained. The flow, and the Buddha used the word Dhamma or Dharma, is the flow. It's the truth. It's nature itself. There's nothing that you can do to enhance it or make it better, and even to explain it or describe it or try to find it or get rid of it. All of these things are useless. The only thing that we can really hope for is that if I allow myself to have the opportunity to relax, to open up, I will see that everything is in the flow. Everything is Dhamma. Then there is nothing that you really have to do. Just relax and be with what is happening now. This is where the practice of mindfulness is being taught. Unfortunately, these days, mindfulness has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Go figure. I don't understand it. Well, I understand it because that's egos grasping something and then selling it, marketing it, and making it into something, a product or a commodity. Again, there's goodness under it, but they kind of lost the point. And it loses its spiritual aspect. They'd be happy that it lost its Buddhist aspect. That's alright. And even for myself, I don't mind so much if you don't have to include the Buddha in it. But it's spiritual. And when we become truly mindful, and when we're allowing ourselves to experience the essence of the moment, there's nothing to buy or sell, there's nothing to get or get rid of, there's no exchange, there's no here and there's no this or that. There's this pure essence. Some call it spirit, we call it Dharma, some call it flow, energy, consciousness, some would call it God, universe. There are many names for it, and especially in other languages. But once you understand that, then you don't have to try to do anything about it. You simply know that it's flowing through everything that you do. So it becomes a basis or a foundation for everything you do as well. I'd like to believe that it helps us to slow down, to be more in the moment, to appreciate what is happening now, and yeah, it helps us to see the true nature of whatever it is that's happening in this moment. Anyway, I'm going to continue with the topic. We were talking about forgiveness. I gave you some detailed instructions of the first part of the forgiveness, which was to forgive yourself for harming others. The second part is to forgive yourself for harming yourself. And this is really tricky because many people, especially in our Australian culture, we've never really been taught this concept that we are harming ourselves. We would like to believe that harm really only comes from other people, and therefore we are somehow either in a constant battle with other people, you harm me, then I'll harm you, and it's going back and forth, or we're in a state of constantly trying to protect ourselves from being harmed by other people. And meanwhile, the other people are also protecting themselves from being harmed. So it's like we don't really meet each other, and we don't really trust each other. There's a lack of openness and honesty, and definitely the love doesn't flow. I've been in some situations in my life, probably sometimes it would have been in Buddhist monasteries, and sometimes in meditation retreats, sometimes even more recently in maybe some kind of almost hippie kind of communities where people really have dropped their defenses. They're not afraid that anybody around them is going to harm them anymore. So the love literally flows. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming when you come to a community like that, especially if you're a very traditional sort of person, you know, you're maybe, I know in Thailand, for example, people are accustomed to, you know, to Wai and Anjali to another, whereas in these hippie kind of situations, they'll just come up and hug you, you know, and it's a little bit maybe confronting. But then when you drop your defenses and you start to realize, oh, it's so nice. This person can just freely come up and hug me, or I can go and hug this person, and there's no, oh, why did he do that? Oh, what's she looking for? Oh, you know, you don't have to work anything out. It was just a beautiful exchange. And by the beauty and the virtue of my work, I meet a lot of very open-minded people. And even usually at the end of a talk, I quite often say, I do free hugs. For example, I said that last night. I got one hug. But it's all right, I'm not fishing for hugs. I'm not saying, oh, you know, I'm not counting, oh, I got 5 hugs tonight, you know. It's not, you know. It's also, I'm offering hugs. It's funny because usually when I hug people, they will say, oh, because I don't just go, and you know, and leave it. I hug, I relax, I breathe, and people, at first they kind of go, like, you know, almost like, let me go, and then they go, oh, this is kind of nice, oh. And they're a bit like chocolate, you know, they kind of just melt in your arms, and they say to me, oh, you do good hugs, nice hugs. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Because I'm not afraid of the other person, and I know that they would like a hug. And you know yourself, you know, when you're with your partner or your family or certain people that you allow, that you let into your life, to have a nice hug is a really beautiful thing. The trouble is in our society is that it's unfortunately detected or seen as maybe a sexual thing, but it doesn't have to, It's got nothing to do with sex, in fact. It can be really beautiful things. And one of the beauties of my job is that sometimes people will just come up, strangers, never talk to them, and we just meet and we have a hug. And it's quite intimate. It's not sexual, but it's you can feel the humanness. It's almost like what's in them is in me. I feel them, they feel me. It's almost like I'm hugging myself. So there's this beautiful breaking down of the barrier that stops the love from flowing. So I'm now wondering how I got onto the topic of hugging strangers, but it doesn't matter because it's all on topic, because it's about letting the love flow and checking yourself. Why would I not hug a stranger, especially someone that you know is harmless? It's a beautiful thing. There's a woman who travels around the world, mother someone or other, I don't know. Amma, yeah, is it? Yeah. And she travels around the world hugging people. That's her thing, that's what she does. She, you know, it's kind of like spiritual hugs or something like that. And she hugs people and they just cry, you know, or they laugh, or, you know, they're just, it's such a release and a relief for them. I think, man, it's a really sad world where, you know, if you're not getting enough hugs, that, you know, you have to wait for some lovely Indian woman to come all the way from India to hug her and have a release or a, you know, a moment. I'm even thinking of doing hugging workshops. Maybe we'll have one here at the Metta Centre one day. Probably 3 people will come. And they're people that have already hugged each other anyway.
Well, look at the nursing home, you know.
Yep.
Yeah,
Things like
they
that,
need
you know,
it really badly.
The age, they can just, to have a hug means so much to them.
Yeah. And even myself, I have to admit, my mum is in a nursing home. I'm not going around hugging the residents. Actually, again, our society is so anal retentive that it would seem improper for a man like myself to just go up and hug some old lady. They probably wouldn't mind me hugging the old men, but these days, I mean, how can you differentiate? I mean, you know, who can hug who and for what reason and for how long? But they are energizing and healing and breaking down that physical distance and barrier. And this can help you to break down the mental barriers. One of the first times I taught, it was the first retreat that I taught in Turkey. And I'd come from Thailand. Thailand, as I've said, is very proper, everybody wise to each other, they're not shaking hands even, you know, let alone hugging or anything like that. So I went to Turkey and taking my good Buddhist values and my own Australian values, and we did a retreat, and of course it was quite silent and along the rules of retreat and everything. And as soon as the retreat finished, the guy who sat right in the front row, we finished the retreat and he said, "Can I give you a hug?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" So he gave me a big hug, and it was almost like my introduction to Turkish culture. I realized that they are very affectionate people. They also kiss on both cheeks, so men are kissing men, but it's not, again, it's not sexual, it's a respect, actually. And there are ways of showing this, and so I really adopted this culture, and so now sometimes I'm bringing it back into my culture as well, and even to the extent where my mum has said to me, you know, stop hugging people, you know, it's like, you don't know them or what their story is or something. It's like, it's alright, Mum, you know. And yeah, so what we can relate this topic to is the barrier to what is stopping my love from flowing. And not only in that physical sense, and perhaps you can reflect on your relationships with the people in your life, your partner, your children, your relatives, your dear friends, people of the opposite sex, people of the same sex, people who have different beliefs to you, perhaps different religion, different cultures, and your relationships with them and how you act in their presence. So the way you act in the presence of a good Buddhist friend might be very different to how you act in the presence of a work colleague, or in the presence of someone that you play sport with. I noticed now, have you noticed in sports, at the end of sports games, nearly everybody's hugging each other. You know, you might even see a tennis player go up and hug the umpire, or, you know, hug the opposition. And sometimes football teams or soccer teams are actually, you know, they're hugging each other. It's a form of respect and sharing and opening up. I can imagine that it's quite difficult for people who are not open to that or not ready to do that. And it doesn't, if you're not, it's not a measure of your ability to love or to care. It's just your conditioning that perhaps doesn't allow you to want to do that or feel to do that. So again, we respect everybody, everybody's different, have different cultural values, different ways of expressing themselves. So, I can't remember what my point was before that. I know that just quite a while back I was talking about forgiveness, the second part of forgiveness.
Forgive myself for harming myself.
Yeah, I know which part I was up to, but there was something that I just needed to complete with regard to that that hugging stuff, but I've skipped over something. It's alright. It'll come up sooner or later, or it won't. I'll just let it go. I forgive myself. So your ability to forgive yourself for harming yourself is something that it takes self-awareness to see how your mind works, how the negativity of your mind can actually be turned on itself. Some people really hate themselves. I don't just mean like angry with themselves. Some people really hate themselves. That's pretty extreme. Some people are angry with themselves now and again. Some people generally just put themselves down and perhaps repeatedly telling themselves, I'm not good enough, I'm not beautiful enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not valuable enough. And so by these constant reminders of how bad you are, or how lazy you are, or how inefficient you are, or whatever, you are kind of digging a hole for yourself. It's almost a downward spiral. It's unfortunate that our minds do get into this, and of course this also can be a description of depression. People can become very depressed, and it's a reflection of basically being angry with yourself, because you're expecting that you should be something that you're not. You're expecting yourself to be better. You're expecting yourself to be more beautiful, or whatever it is. In the absence of those expectations, you are what you are. And when you accept that you are what you are, then there's nothing to change. Change will come from that acceptance. The acceptance itself is already a very radical transformation of your mind. Your ability to say, okay, I see that I have a habit of doing that. I have a habit of beating myself up, or I have a habit of feeling guilty because I didn't do this or didn't do that, or should have done this and should have done that. Even that you can start to pick up when you're saying should or shouldn't. This is kind of just your mind playing with the way things are, but there is actually the way they are, and that is not a should or a shouldn't. Things either are or they aren't. It is or it isn't. There's a reality. When you're able to catch that in your mind, instead of saying shoulds and shouldn'ts, you say, well, what is it or what is it not? What was it or what was it not? In that way, the mind starts to become more stable in the present moment. So, how do we harm ourselves? This is a really important question. How do I harm myself? So I like to ask people to ask this question to themselves. How do I harm myself? Can you give it a one-word answer? Or do you have one-word answers for the ways that, let's put it generally, perhaps not yourself, but generally, how do we harm ourselves? Can you give me maybe a few little examples of how we harm ourselves?
Negativity.
Negativity?
Overindulgence.
Overindulgence. Anybody else? Whatever comes to mind, just say it out, don't be shy.
Controlling.
Controlling, yeah.
Want to mass.
Hey?
Want to mass.
Yeah. Greediness?
Greedy.
Yeah, yeah.
Selfishness.
Yeah.
Affliction.
Affliction then must have a tendency behind it, and then the tendency would be the cause for the affliction. So we can't just say affliction in itself, but then the cause for the affliction, which could be anger or fear, resentment.
That's the only reason I brought up that word.
Hey?
It's the only reason why I put up that word. Just
What?
the monumental of all of it.
Oh, right, yes, yeah. But then this is also why I said one word, to then, when you find one word, then even to go to the root of that word. Okay, it might be an affliction, but then what is the cause of the affliction? And there may be many roots to that, but then take them one at a time and have a look at those. And so you're really actually starting to see, well, how am I causing this harm to myself? Actually, there's quite a long list, unfortunately, of ways that we harm ourselves. A few are impatience and judgment, so self-judgment, judging oneself, but also judging others, and punishment or self-punishment, guilt, and actually one of my favourite causes for self-harm is perfectionism. When we have a mind that is only focused on things being perfect, that is the way I want them to be, and they're not the way I want them to be, then I feel resentment, I feel bitterness, I feel anger, I feel disappointment, and it's a cause for many of these other things to come up as well. And it's not as if anybody decides, oh, I'm going to be a perfectionist and I want everything to be perfect. it's your karma, it's part of your makeup. And it's important to be able to identify it, because it is the cause for a lot of suffering that arises in our minds. I know because I've had it, and I still have traces of it left in my mind. I see sometimes when something's just not happening the way that I expected it to be, and I realise, oops, there's the old perfectionism raising its ugly head again. So at least now I have the mindfulness to know what it is, or I have the mindfulness to catch it, and then I have the wisdom to know what it is, and I have the wisdom to then not follow that. Being an old habit that led me into suffering in the past, I realised this doesn't lead me anywhere. This doesn't make me happy. This is not what I want. So then that's one of the strong causes of harming oneself. So we could go through those similar questions as we did in the first step. How do I harm myself? You choose. And then why do I harm myself? Is it by, how do I do it? Is it by speech, action or thought? So that's just kind of the facts about how I harm myself. Why do I do it? Am I greedy? Am I angry? Am I confused? Do I have awareness of it? Am I aware that I'm harming myself through this means, through this particular form of harm or mental state? Am I wise when I do that? So am I aware that when I do it? Am I wise when I do it? The answer is probably no. Do I intentionally do it? Probably not, because we don't intentionally want to cause suffering to ourselves. Am I sorry to myself? Well, that's a good question. So sometimes we're not really sorry to ourselves. Sometimes we believe that we deserve punishment, that we're not good enough, or we made a mistake so that we deserve to feel bad or deserve to feel guilty or something like that. Which is a bit sad that we have to punish ourselves or beat ourselves up in this way. It's not necessary, because there is another way of doing it, and that's doing it with love, doing it with wisdom, with patience, with compassion. So, and that's the same with all forms of teaching. In order to teach, mostly in the past, people, and I know I was when I was young, and most parents did, and even schools and others, they teach by fear. If you don't do this, you're going to get that. There will be some punishment for not doing this, learning this lesson. Or, you know, I'll smack you, or you'll be deprived of a privilege because you didn't pass this lesson, or you didn't do this thing. So, instead of using punishment and fear to teach something, you can use love. You can use patience. You can use compassion. Which means sometimes that you have to repeatedly do the lesson, repeatedly show this person the way. But if you do it with love and patience, then they will get the lesson, and it will be a more beautiful lesson than if you punish them in order to get the lesson, so to speak. And in fact, they may not even get the lesson. They'll just surrender to your punishment and say, yep, I got it, I know now. But they don't do it. They'll just go back to their old ways. There was no transformation in themselves. So am I sorry that I did that to myself? I hope so. And then you reflect, well, that's how I was in the past. It's not how I am now, and it's not how I want to be in the future. I don't want to continue this behavior. So you can change your mind. It changes through wisdom, through understanding. And you realize, in the past I was ignorant, I was foolish, I was untrained, I was uneducated, I didn't know what I know now. Now I know it, I'm going to do my best. So you're kind of making a determination to be better in the future. And then you can say to yourself, I forgive myself. Again, listen to your words, listen to it. Does it really resonate with you? Do you really believe it? Can you really forgive yourself? Hopefully that it sinks into your mind, hopefully that works. And then you can say, may I be free from my suffering? And see how that feels. Do you really want to be free from suffering? Who or what is the cause of your suffering? Is it something out there? Is it people in your life, which we are quite happy to blame for our suffering? Or is it within myself? Whether it be conscious or unconscious, whether it be intentional or unintentional, whether it be from a past life or even this life. There's something that has happened in the course of my history, whether it's this life or past lives, that's put me in the situation that's happened, that the cause and conditions have been right for that result to arise. I forgive myself. May I be free from my suffering. May I be free from my suffering. So now we're setting up a cause to not repeat anything that's going to cause suffering again for myself in the future. Hard lesson, but good lesson. And then you can go around again. So that on the first step, you can keep going on the first step for as long as you like. Could even be 6 months, 1 year. You could be training yourself in self-forgiveness, forgiving yourself for harming others. In the second step, forgiving yourself for harming yourself, you've learned a lot by doing the first step. And in fact, what you learned in the first step was that when you harmed others, you were simultaneously harming yourself. And then you realize this is not what I want to do. So because you harmed others, you feel bad. So you realize, by harming somebody else, I just feel bad. It's not going to help me, and it definitely doesn't help them. So then you realize, I don't want to harm anybody else. So then you realize, I don't want to harm myself. And so great self-compassion arises. And then, so you can repeat that, the second step, as long as you like. As long as you feel you have to. And then at some point, you come to realize, well, the third point, the third step, is to forgive others for harming me, but you've already come to understand in the first and second steps that actually I am the cause of my suffering, even though I can't see it or maybe don't understand it. I've put myself in a situation where that effect will unfold through a previous cause. So, did other people really harm me? And you can decide that for yourself according to your own wisdom. But you may realize that, or as I realized, that by forgiving myself, I automatically forgave others. What I realized was that I harmed other people through my greed, hatred, and delusion. Basically through my lack of awareness and my ignorance. So then I realized I was harming myself through the same things, and then I realized anyone and everyone who harmed me were also greedy, angry, and confused. They weren't aware and they weren't wise. That's why they harmed me. So I realized they're the same as me. Whatever they did wrong, is basically coming from the same reasons of why I did things wrong. So by forgiving myself, I automatically forgave the others. And this helped me to realize that this third part of forgiveness actually already unfolds itself. You don't really have to go through it step by step. But for those people who like to perhaps follow a routine or something, you can ask those same questions and go through it. If you'd like more detail, please go to my book, Forgiveness for Everyone, Jeff Oliver. You can download the book for free, and you can get a copy of this and go through the teachings by yourself. when we are able to forgive ourselves for harming others, forgive ourselves for harming ourselves, and to forgive others for harming us, this is actually a great liberation of the mind. This really puts you in the present moment. To a large extent, what you've done is you've cleared your past. It doesn't mean that you've cleared your karma. It doesn't mean that the effects that you put in place still won't, the causes that you put in place won't come to effect in the future, because they still will. But you will be more clear, more mindful when they do arise, and you'll be ready to meet them with wisdom and openness and honesty. And the wisdom is, I understand now that when something happens to me, there's a previous cause for that. Whether it be this life or a previous life or how many previous lives, I don't know. But there's definitely a cause for it. So it helps us to remain calm, to accept the situation. When you are able to accept, the mind calms down. When the mind calms down, actually you see things clearly and you understand more clearly. You see the natural law of karma, cause and effect. So forgiveness is really a way of understanding the past, but also understanding this natural law of cause and effect, and also understanding how your own mind works. Any little questions about forgiveness before I step on? Yeah?
Is there any way to put that into dependent origination?
Is there any way to hook that into dependent origination? Firstly, what I have to do is reflect on the parts of dependent origination which I haven't looked at for quite some time. It may or may not, but definitely dependent origination is karma in itself. It's a description, if you like, a breaking down of this causes this, causes this, causes this. But this is actually more personal, and it's about your story, about your life, about your experiences, which is not in the teaching of dependent origination, because that's more factual about the processes of mind. So this is more about my story, about what I've experienced. Actually, if you practice the teachings of dependent origination and you can understand that, you don't need to do forgiveness. You'd bypass it, because you realise it's all just a story anyway, which is pretty nice if you can do that. Yeah. And there are some other aspects of mindfulness meditation, or realizations that we can have through mindfulness meditation, that can bypass the forgiveness process. So it's really for people who are starting out, whose minds are not really clear yet. If they can start to clear their mind through the forgiveness process, it will help them to be more mindful. Then they'll be able to see the truth, and then they'll realize that perhaps they didn't even need to do forgiveness. But it's almost like you have to do forgiveness to realize that you didn't need to do forgiveness, which is a funny way of saying it. So, I don't know how that connects, and perhaps they don't, because they're perhaps just quite different teachings. One's dealing with the facts of the processes of the mind, the other is more dealing with the content of the mind, the story of who I am. So, anybody else? Okay, so self-forgiveness, self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-wisdom, intuition, if you like, self-love. So when we did our first little guided meditation this morning, wasn't that long ago, it was this afternoon, wasn't it? See, that break was so long. Felt like a whole half a day's gone.
It was this morning in England.
Huh?
It was this morning in England, perhaps.
Oh, there you are. Then self-love. This ability, and if you've done these other little practices that I've mentioned, even a little bit or a lot, especially forgiveness, but also self-acceptance, it starts to naturally flow and manifest as self-love. Our ability to love ourselves as we are, which means I don't need to change anything. I gave a nice little quote last night, and it's not a Buddhist quote, it's from a guy who kind of teaches self-improvement, but what he says is no amount of self-improvement can make up for the lack of self-acceptance. No amount of self-improvement can make up for the lack of self-acceptance. So, a lot of people are working on self-improvement. They're trying to improve themselves. But if you don't accept yourself, doesn't matter how much self-improvement you force yourself to do, if you've not accepted yourself, it's going to be a waste of time. Because there's no acceptance, there's no openness. The heart is not open to receive. And the other way round, if you practice self-acceptance, you actually don't need self-improvement. What to improve on? Are you really that bad that you need to improve? When you're able to accept yourself, your heart softens. It starts to become more open, more relaxed. It starts to flow. So then what we need to do is see what is the blockage, or what are the blockages to self-acceptance. So there's a question I might like to ask you. Can you give me any one-word answers that might be blockages to self-acceptance?
Comparing?
Yeah, good. Comparing. Which is quite similar to judgment.
Yeah.
But judgment can also be a separate thing here. Self-judgment and comparing ourselves to others.
Disbelief.
Disbelief. Not believing that we can accept ourselves. Yeah? Or even love ourselves.
Yeah, like lack of confidence.
Yeah, lack of confidence. Which can sometimes just be based on a lack of information. That we haven't even been told that we are able to accept ourselves and love ourselves. When I grew up, it was a matter of don't love yourself. Love other people. Don't love yourself. It's not about you. Strangely, it seems that it's changing now, and we're realizing, well, it is about me because I'm the one who's suffering. This is my karma. If I sort this out, then I might be able to be some service to the world. I may be able to help others. But as long as I'm screwed up and mixed up and confused and blocked, how am I going to be of service to others? So it's really about coming back home and sorting out your own house before you go off trying to sort out other people's. What is the blockage? What are the blockages to self-acceptance?
Confidence? Lack of confidence?
Lack of confidence, yes. Laziness? Could we be lazy to accept ourselves?
Anything's possible.
Anything is possible, isn't it?
Discontent.
Discontent? discontent. I have a big word that basically means the opposite of acceptance. Would you like to have a guess what it is?
Opposites.
Hey? Concepts.
No, unaccepted.
Non-acceptance? Unacceptance? Yeah. It's not quite that easy, simple or straightforward. It is another word that doesn't contain the word acceptance. But I did accept your answer.
Refuse.
Hey?
Refuse.
Refusing and
Regret.
regret. Not bad. Yeah. It is a re. The word does start with R-E. So there's a clue.
Rejection.
Rejection is really close.
Oh.
Still alright. Remorse.
Remorse is good too. Yeah. It's not an English lesson, by the way. But it kind of works that way too. This was
Regret.
It's already been said, regret. This was a huge realization for me, and I have to admit that it came many, many years after the beginning of my practice. Maybe could have even been about 15 years that it took me to find this word and to realize what it meant. I may have heard it in those 15 years, it may have come up, but it didn't strike me in the same way. And when it hit me this day, it was almost as if it was written across the sky. R-E. Can you see it?
What does it end with? What does it end with?
It ends in E. And it means the opposite of acceptance.
Revenge?
No. Shall I tell you?
Relief.
No, it's not relief.
Relief. Relief.
Relive.
Yeah.
Not refuse either.
No. It's resistance. Resistance. Pushing away. Basically saying, no. No. No in so many forms. I can't do that. It's not what I want. I'm not ready. I don't want it. It doesn't suit me. It doesn't work for me. It's not in my culture. It's not, my parents didn't teach me that. No, 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 no. And what this is to protect this little marshmallow of an ego that feels that it needs to be protected. And this is where something about the Buddha's teachings becomes very profound. If this ego is not a self, if it's not a permanent self, it doesn't need any protection. It doesn't need any boundaries. It doesn't need any fortress or something to protect it. It can be burst wide open and nothing's going to go wrong. But we don't see that because we're always living in this self-protected little environment going, no, 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 no. But when you make cracks in this resistance and you start to see the sunlight streaming through, you start to realize, wow, maybe there's sunshine out there. Maybe there's love can come through these cracks. And almost like the cracks in a dam wall or something, it slowly starts to crack more and more open and more starts to flow through. And then, sometimes like a dam bursting, but sometimes as it filters and weakens and maybe filters and strains through, you start to realize more and more love is actually possible. Both the main love, actually the only love is the love that is coming from the spring, the pure spring of your own love from your own heart. That is the only true love. The love that comes from others is merely just a reflection of your love. People are showing you their love, but it's not your love. When someone says, I love you, you go, oh, hang on, what just happened? I just hugged myself and I realized I'm beautiful. I'm lovable. But it's only because they told me that they love me. They see the beauty of my heart, not the beauty of my face. Maybe that's included. But they see the beauty of my heart and they realize, wow, you are lovable. I love you, they say. And then you hear those words and you go, oh, someone saw how beautiful I am inside. And then your own self-love comes up. I am beautiful. I am love. I am lovable. This is your own love. It's not somebody else's love. It didn't come from that person. It didn't come from their words. It came from within you. All they did was show it to you. So beautiful. And this is unlimited. How much of this love do you want? Like I gave the analogy last night. Your heart, the love in your heart, is like when you walk through the forest and you see natural, pure water bubbling up from the ground. It's a pure spring of water, and you can drink it. It's pure, it's good for your body. It's the most pure thing that you can drink into your body. It's exactly what human beings are designed to drink, is pure, fresh, clean water. And you can have as much as you like. Because as soon as you take a cupful out of that, it's level again. Take a bucketful out, it's level again. If you want, stick a pump in there and start pumping it out. And this is what Coca-Cola does. They go off and they find not only Coca-Cola, but mountain spring water from all over the world. They find these natural springs and they set up a big factory over the top of the spring and they say, we'll have this, and then they sell it to you. The Buddha said, water is free for everybody. Love is free for everybody. And the most beautiful part of this is, you are the source. How much do you want? How long do you want it? How pure would you like it? Unlimited. And this love has nothing to do with anybody else. It's not romantic love. It's not the love that you enter into with somebody else as some kind of a commitment or a union or a almost a business deal. Sometimes these days relationships are more like business deals. It's like, well, you know, you're going to be my partner in business and, you know, we're going to do this together and blah, blah, blah. And it's nice, it's lovely, and I know this is what the world is based on, but there's something else that is beyond that. Something else that's more pure, and it's this unconditional, unlimited, boundless love that is already within you, and you don't have to find it, you don't have to search for it, but what you might have to do, at least in the initial stages, is ask yourself, what's blocking it? Why am I not feeling it? And sometimes, strangely enough, the reason that we don't feel self-love is because we're too busy trying to love other people, which is a nice thing. We're taught to do this, especially in our culture. We're taught to love other people, put it out there, love everybody. And sometimes I can see, sometimes when people are over-loving. They're too loving. They're too caring. They're always giving you things. They love you so much. I become a little bit suspicious. Not in a negative way, but I think there's something missing in your heart. That you feel the need that you have to do this overtly, too much, outwardly, on the external level, even though they might say, I'm not looking for love, I've got a lot of love, I love everybody, I'm giving it out. I really think that there's some kind of an empty hole there, that somehow they're trying to fill it up by giving the love out. That's not the case for everybody, but sometimes you can see that it's not really genuine. Whereas there are more, I could say, enlightened people, perhaps more purely spiritual people, that their love is not very obvious on the surface. They're not, bubbly, smiley, almost tickling you, giving you things and, being very overtly and openly loving. But there's more of a stable, steady flow, almost, I think that'll have to do, stable, steady flow of love that is unshakable. It's very kind of fundamental. It's almost like the current of the river that flows under the river. You might see a river and it doesn't look like it's flowing, but they say, what do they say? Something.
Still waters run deep.
Still waters run deep. Thank you. I knew it was something like that. The water may be quite still on the surface, but there is a current underneath that we don't see and we don't know. And that is a strong power. So sometimes, and I believe it quite often in a spiritual sense, that the person may not be acting so loving, but there's a strong force of love behind what they are doing. And mostly in the world, we'll be tricked by the external, superficial love. And, this Valentine's Day crap, I'm sorry to say, that we've just gone through a few days ago, 2 days ago. I'm like, what is this? It's the chocolate companies. International and sugar. Because basically you can't have chocolate without sugar. So it's the sugar companies, it's the chocolate companies, and then everybody else makes a whole lot of money out of it. The flower companies, the florists, and you name it, and it's become international. It's just another excuse to have a big economic boom on one day. Look at Easter. Easter's become a chocolate festival. And Christmas in Australia is a sugar festival. It's unbelievable, the amount of sugar.
The family time.
Sorry?
It's also the family time.
It's supposed to be the family time. But commercially, and the way it's sold to us, I opened up the Woolies catalogue at Christmas time. The first 3 or 4 pages was almost all sugar. Sugar products. And they say, Christmas, Christmas, it's Christmas. Sugar and Christmas. Sugar and Valentine's Day. Sugar and Easter. Let's have a holiday. And what do you do with your kids on their birthday? You look at the table of a birthday party, it's all sugar. And look at the cake. Anyway, I'm not here. Stop that.
Sometimes it's natural sugar, like sometimes it's fruit and fruit platters and things.
The world
Depends
is
on the
changing.
background of the people.
The world is changing. But So, how do we get to sugar?
Still waters
Love.
run deep.
We get caught up in the external.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah, Valentine's Day. Thank
It came
you. Yes,
down too.
and it was
It's
the
all mindful.
it was the superficial love.
Every day.
Isn't every day is Valentine's Day? Every day is your birthday. Every day is Jesus Christ Day. Every day is a reminder of the miracle of your life. It doesn't. You don't need to set aside a particular day and mark it on the calendar, and on that day, I'll show you how much I love you, or or I'll look forward to love from you. People, you will see the young people that you'll hear them talking. Oh, I told her I loved her on Valentine's Day, or someone might say, oh, nobody messaged me on Valentine's Day, I didn't get anything this year or something. So they might be thinking, what's wrong with me? So there's nothing wrong with anybody.
That's sad.
It's sad that we think that way, but it's beautiful when we come to understand, when there's nothing wrong with anybody. And just as we sat here earlier, and as we sit here now, I'd just like to remind you that your heart is beating, your breath is breathing, your food is digesting, all the systems and organs of your body are all working perfectly. Even if you had cancer or some sort of disease in your body, even, get this, the cancer is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's very efficient. You can't, people hear that and it's like, what are you saying, cancer's a good thing? I didn't say cancer's good, I just said it's perfectly doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's a very efficient virus. And your body is working its hardest to repel that. Trust that your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. The body heals itself. You watch, it heals just about everything. Not all things, or some things take longer than others. But the body is very efficient in healing itself. And you are not doing that. So we start to trust the body. We allow and accept the body as it is now. So I'm bringing you back to this moment. All the systems of your body are working perfectly right now. You might disagree, you might say, well, my heart's not as good as it used to be, or, my kidneys are playing up or something. But in this moment, they are either in a process of repairing themselves, or they are exactly the way they have to be according to the life you've lived. It's also cause and effect and karma. So you come into a state of acceptance and you say, yeah, the body is the way it is. You might look in the mirror and say, oh, I'm not as beautiful as I used to be. What does that mean?
It means you're saying you're more beautiful.
Well, there you go. Yeah. How can you be the way you were? It's impossible. Even each second, each moment, you're in a state of transformation. You are in a flow. You can't be what you were in the past. It's impossible. And in the future, you can't be as you are now. We are in this flow, this natural trajectory that we actually have no real control over. So in this moment, my heart's beating, it's doing its job. My lungs are working, all my vital organs are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They're doing their best. And all my senses are working. My eyes are working. What a miracle. My ears are working. My nose, my taste buds are working. The sense of my body, I can feel everything in my body. It's all working. And my mind has the ability to take in all this information from all of the senses, and then it can have an experience with regard to that. It can say, wow, look at the light shining on the leaves of the tree, or listen to the sound of whatever, or feel the energy in my body. We can appreciate and experience. So the mind, not only has it got the ability to have thoughts, but it also has the ability to appreciate, to accept, to love, to forgive, and all the beautiful things that can come up. Negative things can also come up. You know, we get angry, we're afraid, we may feel resentment and resistance to things. But know that there's a cause for that. So you start to accept that as well. So in this moment, actually, everything is perfect just as it is. Not only in your body and in your mind, but also beyond this body and mind. Out in the street, you might walk outside and see rubbish on the ground. You might see a car pumping out pollution. You might see some graffiti on some beautiful building or even somebody's property. And you could say, that's bad, that's wrong, that shouldn't be here. That's not right. But on the other hand, what's the reality? It is here. It is present. It is here and now. Okay, we can go back to the story of how we think the world should be. Should, that word should, or we can say, this is the way the world is now. And accept what you see, what you hear, what you feel. You don't necessarily have to accept what you think, because that can get you into a lot of trouble, especially when you're having wild fantasies or crazy thoughts. Don't just blindly accept. I'm not asking you to blindly accept anything. I'm asking you to accept what you are experiencing as a reality in the present moment. This also allows the mind to calm down. It says, okay, this is the way it is. This body of mine, I have trouble with my knee, I have trouble with my hip, I have trouble with my back, but I accept it. But I keep going also. I still surf, I still cycle, I still do yoga. I work on perhaps what might be the causes of these things, that maybe I can make them more workable. But I accept them as they are. I know my mind isn't perfect, but I accept it as it is. And then what we start to find is that the world is imperfectly perfect. That the imperfections of the world are actually perfect, because the world itself is not perfect. Or it is the fact that the whole world is perfect, it's just the way we look at it. So nice. So everything in this moment, as we sit here, according to our personal experience, is the way it is. Whether you think that it shouldn't be like this or not, it is as it is. Beyond your body and mind, the external world is also as it is. That we don't have any control over. Maybe a little bit if you want to educate and you want to do something and make some changes in the world, you can try to do that. One thing that I'm saying here today is that self-acceptance. Maybe you don't accept the external world as it is, but one thing that you can try doing is accepting your body and mind as they are in this moment. And there's one bloody good reason for doing that, and that is, it's the truth. Your body and the mind are the way they are now. And this moment cannot be changed. But if you accept, this is how I am now, that acceptance calms your mind. Watch my hands. Calms your mind. This is your mind, by the way. Calms your mind and allows your mind to be open. From there, with mindfulness and open-mindedness, you will see the truth. When you see the truth, you realize nothing has to be changed by me. And you enter the stream. You enter the flow of reality, of truth, of Dhamma. Then you change from being an ordinary worldling, a normal, caught up in the dramas and stories and situations of this world, and you become bloody good question. What do you become? If you're not a human. A non-worldly.
And you become yourself.
Nothing special.
It's the thing that I'm referring to is a teaching in Buddhism where you enter the stream and you are no longer the putujana, the worldling. You have entered a stream of, let's call it consciousness, that only has one destination or one path, and that is the path of enlightenment. So you have become, I guess I can call it semi-enlightened, or on an irreversible flow towards enlightenment. And I can tell you that this will solve most of your problems. Not all, because you still believe that you are a self, but you are much less of a self than you used to be. And that means you have much less problems. And this is very profound. And to talk about it, to try to explain it, is a very difficult thing to do, to put it into words. But along the way, we can start to apply and do the things that I've talked about today, especially the forgiveness practice. When you begin, you can practice meditation, the developing of self-awareness, of mindfulness, watching physical and observing, feeling, sensing physical processes, and coming to understand what is it to be in this body and what are these processes, even this cause and effect relationship. But then as we develop that mindfulness, we start to watch mental states, we watch how thoughts come and go, we watch how mental reactions come and go, we start to understand those. Then we start to understand the interrelationship between the mental states and the physical reactions. And then we start to realize everybody else is also operating on these things. The way that I'm operating is the same way that you're operating. And then when I can forgive myself and understand myself, then I can also forgive and understand you. And this is when the blockages of our self-love and our universal love can be removed and broken down. And this is when the real love flows. That's all I'm going to say for this afternoon. Sa.